questions. We're moving right on very rapidly. Directing your attention to the Contras, the resistance, the insurgents, the Democrats in your country, much has been said about their inability to win. There's been press reports about the fact that they are not concerned about human rights. Could I ask you your observation with the Contras' consistency with international understanding of human rights obligations, and what type of a record as a member and a leader of that organization do you think it rightly should have?
Well, as way back as 1984, we had correspondence with the International Red Cross. We offered to subscribe the Geneva Conventions, and we invited them to take prisoners that we had and turn them over to the Sandinistas, and they didn't do anything about it, not effectively anyway. They said that they would start by accepting correspondence from the prisoners that we had, and they did. Then we had a code of conduct as way back as 1983, and we have been conducting in an ever-increasing way, teaching human rights to our men, bringing in ministers and priests to minister to them and to speak to them about the respect of human rights, the love of neighbor, and actually, if you knew the composition of our troops, you would see that in many cases it's like a family enterprise. We have father and daughter, father and son, cousins, brothers, and these people are peasants, these people are small landowners, and they fight in their own districts, they know the people around, and for us to commit human rights abuses against the civilian population is tantamount to suicide, because they are our very lifeblood. They're the ones who join our troops. They're the ones who supply us with intelligence, with food. They're the ones who hide our wounded. They're the ones who medicate them. So really there has been a lot of, the Sandinistas are very apt at propaganda, and it has been demonstrated already that when they have claimed that we have committed murder and all of that, it's not true. There was a recent report in the Washington Post where the newspaper people were brought to a place in Nueva Guinea to show atrocities of ours, and it turned out that every one of the people in the truck that we had ambushed had been dressed in greens, military greens, and were bearing weapons. But the Sandinistas considered them civilians. So a lot of what has been said is our lies, and we do, of course, have tried to improve the conduct, the behavior of our men.
You indicated that you had a code of conduct.
Yes, sir.
What specifically and very quickly is in that code of conduct that you require your people to conform with?
Well, the code of conduct is based on the Geneva Convention, treatment of civilians, treatment of captured soldiers, and general behavior with their fellow guerrillas.
What is the morale of the Contras at this time?
Very high, sir. It's surprisingly high now, and it's been high through hell and high water, like you say.
What would you say motivates the Contras that you have, very quickly?
Well, a love of country, a love of freedom, a sense of
Thank you, Mr. Calero. I just have one last question. I don't want to run over my time. You're very familiar with the Sandinista army, their military capabilities, the aid that they have received, the size of that army. Would you say that army is strictly in its composition and its training and its military hardware and exercises purely defensive, or both offensive and defensive in its nature?
Well, they have been offensive when we're weak, and now that we have regained some strength through the aid of the United States, they have definitely become offensive, defensive, and we have taken on the initiative, the upper hand.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Calero.
Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Calero, I've just received word from the members of the House Select Committee that they wish very much to have the opportunity to discuss this matter further with you. So if you would just step aside temporarily, and we would like to now call upon our next witness so the next witness can give his opening statement. And so with that in mind, the panel will take a short recess. Momentarily to permit you to present your opening statement. Your opening statement has been received by the joint panel, but the American public has not heard you yet, so if you wish to proceed, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Senators, Congressmen, I'd like to take a few moments to acquaint the committees with who I am. My background as a career Army man spans more than 35 years. Since my retirement from the Army in 1978, I have, as chairman of the United States Council for World Freedom, worked to help the democratic forces who oppose what I believe is Mr. Daniel Ortega's attempt to subvert the Nicaraguan popular revolution by transforming that revolution into a totalitarian Marxist regime. I offer this not as a substitute for the answers that I'm happy to provide to your questions or to take up the time of the committees. As you know, I'm glad to appear here voluntarily to assist the committees. I believe that this brief statement will in fact save you time. I am from California, having been born in the town of Independence in the Sierra Nevada mountains near Sequoia National Park. I graduated from the University of California at Los Angeles. I was commissioned an infantry second lieutenant on January 14, 1943, and volunteered for parachute duty overseas with the Office of Strategic Services. Now, I want to mention just a few things about my time in the Army. I believe these facts will help you see what has motivated my personal efforts to help achieve democracy in Central America. Shortly before the invasion of southern France in 1944, I led a three-man team which parachuted behind Nazi lines in France to organize and lead a French resistance unit in combat against the Nazis. In December of 1944, I volunteered for duty in the Far East, and I was the leader of a team which trained and led democratic Chinese guerrillas in operations behind Japanese lines in southern China. In August of 1945, I led a rescue mission which parachuted into a Japanese prisoner of war camp on Hainan Island off the coast of China to successfully liberate some 400 Allied prisoners of war. After the close of World War II, I spent 3 years in Manchuria. There I served as the head of a U.S. military liaison mission to the democratic Chinese who were fighting the Chinese communists. During the Korean War, I was an infantry battalion commander. I also served for 1 year as the deputy chief of the CIA mission in Korea, organizing missions behind enemy lines in support of American troops. During the Vietnam War, I served 2 years as head of a joint Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine unit which carried out reconnaissance and intelligence operations behind North Vietnamese lines in support of our soldiers in Vietnam. In 1976, I returned to Korea, this time as the Chief of Staff of the United Nations Command and of the U.S. forces in Korea. In this assignment, I objected publicly to the Carter administration's plan to withdraw U.S. troops from Korea, which I believe would have increased the risk of war in Asia. Ultimately, because of Congress's objections to this withdrawal plan, registered in a series of House and Senate hearings at which I testified, President Carter deferred his plan to withdraw our troops, except for one. I was reassigned to a considerably quieter post. 1 year later, on May 31st, 1978, I voluntarily retired from the U.S. Army after more than 35 years of active service. Now let me conclude by briefly outlining how I came to help the democratic forces in Nicaragua. In August of 1981, while I was in Taiwan to lecture on what I saw as the continuing threat posed to democracy by communism, I was asked to form a U.S. chapter of the World Anti-Communist League. The League was founded in 1954 by the Korean patriot and American ally Syngman Rhee. By the early 1980s, the major figure in the League was the Belgian general and Senator Robert Kloos, who, like me, had fought the Nazis in the resistance, but unfortunately, unlike me, had been captured by the Nazis. In November 1981, I established the United States Council for World Freedom as the American chapter of the League. Working with General Kloos, we shifted the main thrust of League activities from passive anti-communism to active support of the pro-democratic resistance movements fighting communist totalitarianism. I first became involved in the events in Central America in the early 1980s when I began to assist El Salvador to cope with the Marxists who were waging terrorist warfare against its democratic government and the civilian population. I helped to bring former U.S. military personnel to El Salvador to train their army in counter-guerrilla fighting. In May of 1984, the Undersecretary of Defense, Dr. Freddie Clay, asked me to chair a panel, which has been referred to as the Singlaub panel. The purpose of this was to examine the war being waged against El Salvador by the Marxist guerrillas. After studying the situation, I recommended a reduction in the level of violence, an increase in intelligence training and small unit tactics, and clearer explanations to the people of the human rights violations of the communist guerrillas. In addition to Undersecretary Clay and other U.S. officials, I briefed Colonel North and other staff of the National Security Council on my findings. This was my first substantive meeting with Colonel North, although I had met him briefly in early 1981 while briefing a wide range of U.S. defense and security policy officials on the value of special operations forces for counterterrorism and hostage rescue operations. In January of 1984, I met Adolfo Calero. I approached him on my own initiative and offered to help the Nicaraguan Democratic opposition in the same way I had personally assisted in El Salvador, that is, by sending former military advisors. In addition, I offered to raise private funds when he told me this was one of their principal needs. Now, I want to emphasize that my offer to Mr. Calero, made in January of 1984, was an entirely personal one, unconnected with the U.S. chapter of the World Anti-Communist League, the U.S. Council for World Freedom, and in no way suggested or directed by anyone in the United States government. I did inform U.S. officials, including Colonel North, of my efforts in this regard. Later, when it became clear that the Nicaraguan democratic resistance needed medicines and other non-lethal aid, I established a project within the U.S. Council for this purpose. Subsequently, when I saw that the Nicaraguan resistance needed arms, I personally undertook to arrange a shipment of arms to them. My decision to do so resulted from a visit I made in March of 1985 to the base camps of the resistance, where I had many long conversations with Enrique Bermudez, the military commander of the Nicaraguan Democratic Front. We discussed the type of arms best suited for guerrilla warfare. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that I always have been open about my efforts to help the Nicaraguan democratic resistance. In fact, I have publicly spoken out to anyone who would listen on the need for private American financial support for this democratic cause. The nation's media, I should add, have been very forthcoming in allowing me this opportunity. I also want to emphasize that I have worked in this cause at my own initiative. On the other hand, I have wanted to work in support of the administration objectives which I shared. On the other hand, where I felt particularly strong regarding something, I went forward to achieve my own objective, even when that was in conflict with administration officials. A good example of this was the question of whether or not Eden Pastora, or Comandante Zero as he is affectionately referred to inside Nicaragua, should be encouraged to return to his place in the democratic resistance or be caused to leave the field. At a time when U.S. officials in the CIA and the State Department were apparently trying to keep him out of the resistance organization, I traveled to Costa Rica to try to persuade him to rejoin the struggle. I was convinced then, as I am today, that he could make a vital and very important contribution to the democratic resistance. As in my public disagreement with President Carter over the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Korea, and in the Eden Pastora case, I have not hesitated to disagree with U.S. officials where I believe they are wrong. I should add at this point that I only wish I had known beforehand of our intent to deal in arms with the Iranian government. Unfortunately, I, like most other Americans, knew nothing either directly or indirectly about the Iranian arms deal until it was announced to the public by Attorney General Edwin Meese. In closing, please allow me what might be termed a brief soldier's perspective. This perspective on the fight for freedom in Nicaragua. In doing so, I also want to remind you of what the National Bipartisan Commission on Central America, which was chaired by Henry Kissinger and whose senior counselors include some of you here today. I want to remind you about what they said about Nicaragua only 3 years ago when I began this work. Right now, even as we talk, young Nicaraguans are fighting and dying to rescue their land from the Marxists and from the Soviet subjugation that so inexorably follows the triumph of Marxist totalitarianism. Often undertrained, always underarmed, they attack and regularly defeat the largest army ever amassed on Central American soil, an army that marches on Marxist orders. Based upon all of my combat experience in 4 wars, I can guarantee you today that given the tools, this band of brave warriors, the Nicaraguan democratic resistance, can free their country. They can seize and shut down the first Soviet base on continental American soil. They can stop the spread of communism in Central America, and more importantly, they can bring the benefits of democracy and a free economy to the people of that land. But they need our help, and they need it today, and I believe they deserve it today. In January of 1984, the National Bipartisan Commission on Central America, which, as I noted, had as its senior counselors some of you who are here today, drew the following conclusion on the strategic importance to America of what is happening in Nicaragua, and I quote, "The use of Nicaragua as a base for Soviet and Cuban efforts to penetrate the rest of Central American Isthmus, with El Salvador the target of first opportunity, gives the conflict there a major strategic dimension. The direct involvement of aggressive external forces makes it a challenge to the system of hemispheric security and quite specifically to the security interests of the United States. This is a challenge to which the United States must respond, unquote. Members of this committee, this old soldier did respond. For as Churchill said of the brave Brits nearly 210 years ago, quote, "They fight by themselves alone, but they do not fight for themselves alone," unquote. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for listening to my remarks.
Thank you very much, General Singlaub, and I thank you very much for your very eloquent statement. I'd like to now recognize the Deputy Counsel of the House Select Committee, Mr. Ballin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Singlaub, in late November or early December of 1984, did you meet with officials from what has been referred to in these hearings as Countries 3 and Country 5?
Yes, I did.
And where did that meeting take place, sir?
It took place in the embassies of those two countries here in this capital city.
In Washington, D.C.?
In Washington, D.C., yes.
And what did you say to those officials at that time?
I told them that, as they knew, because I knew both of these officials from a long period of time, I told them both that as a private citizen, I had certain flexibility that government officials did not have in view of the fact that the Boland Amendment had been passed and placed certain restrictions, as yet not clearly defined, on their efforts to solicit funds from another country to help the Nicaraguan freedom fighters.
Did you mention to these officials the kind of help that the Nicaraguan freedom fighters needed?
Yes, I did. I was very specific in stating that they needed bullets and guns.
Did you mention any other kinds of weapons that they might need at that time?
Yes, I was very concerned about the air defense situation and told them that it was very expensive to buy air defense missiles, but that was an important requirement because the Soviets were moving large quantities of the most sophisticated people killer in the world, the Hind D that Adolfo Calero mentioned a little while ago.
Now, sir, what was the response of these officials from Countries 3 and 5 here in Washington?
They expressed concern that they did not want to irritate the Congress by openly defying the Boland Amendment. On the other hand, they expressed sincere interest in being helpful if this could be done in a way that did not attract attention.
Now, sir, after your meetings with officials from Countries 3 and 5, did you meet with anyone who worked at the White House?
Yes, I did. I met with Colonel Oliver North.
And what did you say to Colonel Oliver North?
I reported to him on the conversations I had had with the senior officials of Countries 3 and 5, told him that they appeared to be sincerely interested in helping, but that they themselves did not make those decisions, that they would have to transmit my request to their governments in their own capitals.
Sir, did you specifically brief him on your request for funds from these countries for military assistance to the Nicaraguan resistance?
Yes, I did.
What, if any, follow-up did you suggest to...
Since I was planning a trip to Countries 3 and 5 in January of 1985, I told him that I was prepared to go and meet with senior officials in those governments. In both countries, I knew people very near the top of the government, and I felt that I could expedite or facilitate the decision-making by answering questions on the spot.
And how did Colonel North respond to that?
Well, he concurred in that suggestion and gave it his blessing.
Did he make any specific request to you at that time?
Well, he requested that when I return that I give him a thorough briefing on what transpired.
Now, you say he agreed and gave it his blessing. How did he express that to you? What words did he use to the best of your recollection?
Well, I think he said he thought it was a good idea. He saw no objections, and certainly it appeared to be in keeping with the overall policy of the administration to provide help to the Nicaraguan democratic resistance.
Sir, at that time, approximately in early December of 1984, do you recall having any conversations with Colonel North about foreign nationals conducting operations for the Nicaraguan resistance?
Yes.
What were those conversations, sir?
Well, that it might be useful to use a third country, that is non-Nicaraguan, non-U.S., to conduct operations inside Nicaragua, that he thought that there were people available who could be hired for that purpose.
Did he mention any agent that he had hired, any British agent that he had hired?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
He said that he had this individual who was a former member of the SAS who was, he believed, qualified, and he then asked me for my opinion concerning the basic outline of the operation.
And did you offer an opinion to him on that?
I did, and I recommended that it be approved and be executed.
Now, sir, referring back to your earlier testimony and Colonel North's agreement that you should travel to these countries to solicit from them, did in fact in January 1985 you travel to country number 3?
I did, yes.
And without mentioning the names, who did you meet with? What was the rank generically of the officials that you met with from country number 3?
They were ministers at that ministerial level equivalent to our secretaries of the departments of the executive branch.
And what did you say to them when you met with them?
I emphasized the fact that I was not a member of the United States government. They knew this. I said that the restrictions placed upon the U.S. government was causing some great stress in our ability to render help to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, that there had been a temporary suspension of support to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, that I hoped that they would come to the aid of a country that had been friendly with them for many, many years at this difficult time. I recognized the problems associated with their own relationships in that country and that it had to be secret. I also indicated that I realized they did not want to irritate the Congress of the United States, so because they depend upon the Congress of the United States for aid, and that I thought that we could work out an agreement which would conceal their contribution and prevent these hazards that they expressed to me.
And did you propose to them a way for them to conceal that contribution?
Yes, in the case of Country 3, I offered 3 alternatives. I stated that I could give them a foreign bank account into which they could deposit money. In that circumstance, I would be unable to give them any follow-up information about how the funds were spent. As a second alternative, I stated that I would be willing to meet with their representative at any country in the free world and receive from them an instrument which I would then deposit in an overseas account. And under those circumstances, I could give them a detailed accounting of how the money was spent, if that was important. And in the case of Country 3, I offered a third alternative, which was that since they were in the process of buying large quantities of expensive materiel from the United States through private vendors, that if I knew in advance one of these vendors, I might be able to go to that vendor and reach an agreement where the commission could be shared with the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, and they would not have to transfer that funds. It could be taken care of by one of the vendors selling equipment to Country number 3. I should add that in both cases, I also said that we would be prepared to receive from them military supplies in kind if they preferred to do that.
So, like your discussions that you had earlier in December, in late November of '84 with officials in Washington, did you specifically outline to officials from Country 3 the military needs of the Nicaraguan resistance?
Yes, I did.
And were you specifically soliciting from them funds to help the Nicaraguan resistance with those military needs?
Yes, and I emphasized the fact that the air defense problem was the first one that needed to be solved because of the influx of Soviet-manufactured helicopters, which were very deadly to the resistance.
General Singlaub, let me just make sure that the third option that you presented to the officials from Country 3 is understood. You would agree upon a price for an arms shipment that was going to be sent to them, would that be correct?
Yes.
And as a portion of that price, part of the proceeds would then go to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, is that also correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, in your meeting with officials from Country 3, what, if anything, did you say concerning the United States government, other than what you've already testified to?
I was concerned, based upon the questions that they asked about what my relationship was to the government. I stated that it would be, I believed that it would be possible for me to have someone in the administration send a signal to them, that is, to have someone indicate that I was not operating entirely on my own without the knowledge of the administration. If they felt that that was necessary, that I would try to make such an arrangement after I got back to Washington.
Now, sir, how did the officials that you spoke with from Country 3 respond to your requests?
They expressed interest. They indicated that they would like to have a signal sent by somebody in the administration.
Now, sir, did you subsequently travel to Country 5?
Yes, I did.
And what did you say to officials from Country 5?
Essentially the same thing that I said to Country number 3, except that in Country 5, all purchases of military materiel was handled on a government-to-government basis, and therefore I did not present the third option there.
Sir, did you also discuss with officials from Country 5 military funds for military aid for the Nicaraguan freedom fighters?
Yes, I certainly did, and again emphasized that we would be very pleased to receive contributions in kind, and I could make arrangements for the goods to be carried on a non-U.S. carrier from their ports to an appropriate port in a third country.
Sir, when did you return to Washington after these trips?
I believe that I came in early February 1985.
Did you present the results of your trip to Colonel North as he had requested you to do in December?
Yes, I did.
And what did you tell Colonel North at that time?
Well, I reviewed with him my entire presentation. I believe at that time I still had my handwritten notes. I went through that with him and told him that it would be appropriate at this time for him to have someone who was recognized as a spokesman for the administration to make contact with the representatives here in Washington and to indicate that they knew of my trip and of my request, and that the administration had no objections to that, and it would not get them in trouble with the administration if they did that.
Now, where did this meeting take place? Did it take place in Colonel North's office or elsewhere?
Yes. To my best of my recollection, most of my meetings were with Colonel North in his office, although occasionally he would come to a hotel where I was staying.
Now, did you explain to Colonel North the three options that you had presented to Country 3 on your trip?
Yes, the best of my recollection, I did.
And could you explain again for the members of the committee exactly what, to the best of your recollection, you said to Colonel North concerning those three options?
I told him that I had given to the individual that I had briefed a 3x5 card on which I had placed the name of the bank and the account number into which any funds could be deposited directly. I told him that I was also prepared to go to another country, any place in the free world, and meet with representatives if they asked that. And in the case of country number 3, I said that I presented a third option, which was that since they were buying large quantities of materiel from U.S. vendors, that we could arrange with that vendor to take part of the commission and put it into the account of the Nicaraguan freedom fighters. This would remove any line item in the disbursements of that country number 3 from observation.
And how did Colonel North respond to this last option that you had proposed to the officials from country 3?
Well, I don't recall exactly how he responded, except perhaps to say, well, that might work, something like that.
Now, sir, you said that you testified that Colonel North would arrange to send a signal as you had requested?
Yes.
And did Colonel North himself ask you to make any follow-up with these country officials? Do you recall?
I believe that he said that he would let me know if there was to be any follow-up, but he had to brief his superiors.
And he nonetheless stated to you that he would seek to send the signal.
That's correct, yes.
Sir, do you know whether the solicitation you made to countries 3 and 5 was ever successful, to your own personal knowledge?
No, I do not know.
General Singlaub, directing your attention to March 1985, I believe you stated in your opening statement that you traveled to the base camps of the FDN. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And who did you meet with at that time?
Well, I met, of course, with Adolfo Calero, Enrique Bermudez, and the other members of the directorate of the FDN who were in Tegucigalpa. And, of course, I met with many of the comandantes who had come in from Nicaragua.
Who is Enrique Bermudez? What is his position with the FDN?
He is the military commander for Adolfo Calero.
Now, sir, at that time, did you develop with Enrique Bermudez a list?
Yes, I did. It was a list that developed over a period of 3 or 4 days that I spent with Enrique. We had lots of time together because we were having a lot of transportation problems. That's not the easiest place to travel in that base camp area.
Now, sir, after you had, and this was, this was a list of...
It was a list of small arms and ammunition arranged at one point in order of priority, but it included a mix. In other words, if we were going to buy some AK-47s, or in fact we bought the AKMS, which is a folding stock type of AK-47, we would want to also have some RPG-7s, some light machine guns. So we had a mix of ammunition and other support weapons in addition to the basic infantry weapon.
And this was a list that you had drawn up together with Enrique Bermudez.
Right, and I must say that it also included some air defense missiles, some ground air missiles. The SA-7s is what I had hoped to be able to get.
Now, General Singlaub, in April of 1985, did you meet with Colonel Oliver North?
Yes.
And did you have with you the list developed with Enrique Bermudez?
Yes, I did. I wanted to get his concurrence to make sure that we weren't doing something that was in conflict with what others were doing. So I took the list to him. To my best of my recollection, he made some additions, subtractions to the list, or changed the mix a little bit, still keeping within the constraints of the total amount that Adolfo Calero had said was available for this purchase.
And when you say that you're referring to Colonel North made these changes to the list?
That's right, yes. They were insignificant, but we accepted his suggestions. I had also consulted with other experts, making sure that we were getting the best kind of weapons mix.
After Colonel North made these suggestions to the list of arms, did you come to any agreement with Colonel North as to a final list during this meeting?
Yes, we definitely did. I said I wanted to have a list that was not going to change at the whimsy of someone, and we did reach a clear-cut statement of what we were going to buy. It did not include, by the way, in the ultimate list, any surface-to-air missiles.
General, prior to traveling to the FDN base camps in March, had you ever had any discussions with Colonel North about the legality of arms purchases for the Nicaraguan resistance?
Yes, I did. I don't remember whether that took place in 84 or early 85, but I did ask for his advice. What are the parameters within which I must operate if I'm going to do this? He said that he had discussed this with lawyers, and at the time I believed that he had discussed it with someone in the Justice Department. He gave me the rules.
And what did he tell you?
First of all, that the funds could not be solicited in the United States and banked in the United States. They would have to be deposited outside of this country. Secondly, that we could not use any U.S. carrier, either air or surface, to move them. Could not use any bank, a U.S. bank, to do it, and that it, of course, would not be purchased in the United States. It had to be all of the transaction done outside of the country.
Now, these were the rules, if I understand your testimony, that Colonel North gave you in order for you to be capable of buying weapons for the Nicaraguan resistance, keeping within the United States laws.
That's correct.
And you had this conversation with him prior to traveling to Central America in March of 1985?
To the best of my belief, it was prior to the trip down there, yes.
Let me direct your attention, sir, back again to April of 85. You testified that Colonel North gave his approval to the list.
Right.
Now, after North gave the approval on the proposed arms purchase that you were to conduct, did you then take any steps to procure the arms?
Yes, I met with an arms dealer who had been certified to me by a friend who had been in a position to purchase this type of weapon system from the East Bloc. He gave me the name of and assisted in introducing me to an arms dealer from who was in that business and was considered reliable.
Did you subsequently meet with the arms dealer referred to you?
Yes, I did.
You recall where that meeting took place?
Yes, it took place in the Sheraton Carlton Hotel on 16th and K in this city.
And that would, what month would that be, sir?
That was in April of 1985, toward the end of April.
And what, if anything, did you say to the arms dealer concerning your prior discussions with Colonel North on this proposed transaction?
Well, I'm not certain of the exact words. I believe that I assured him that this list had the blessing of my contacts in the National Security Council. I don't remember at this time whether I actually used Colonel North's name or simply stated that it was had been blessed in the National Security Council by the contacts that I've been using to keep the government informed.
Did the arms dealer that you met with say whether or not he was able to procure these items on the list?
Yes, he assured us, Adolfo Calero was with me at this meeting, that he could procure these weapons and ship them as directed.
General Singlaub, do you, Mr. Chairman, I do not see in front of the witness an exhibit book. Perhaps if we can,
Is this it? Yeah, I have one here.
you do have one? All
Mr.
right.
Ballin, yes.
Does, General Singlaub, does your list have the, if you turn, does it have Exhibit JKS number 1? And around, in about the middle of the book?
Yes.
Now, directing your attention, sir, to Exhibit JKS number 1. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
I think I gave it to you. At least I've seen it before because I do recognize it, and I have.
And when did you first, is that your handwriting on the document?
No. It is
What,
not.
what is this document, sir?
It's a list of weapons and ammunition.
Is this
Soviet-type weapons systems.
Is this the list that you had drawn up with Enrique Bermudez? Or a modification
Well,
thereof?
it went through an evolution. I think this is one of the iterations.
Now, sir, is this the list that Colonel North had approved and that you took to meet with the arms dealer in April of 1985?
Well, this is pretty sloppy. I would hope that I would have had it retyped before taking it to meet with an outsider, but the numbers that are circled are the ones that appeared on the final list.
Now, General Singlaub, could you please explain some of the items on the list, directing your attention particularly to SA7, SA7s as it appears. What were the SA7s as they appeared on this initial list?
This was to be this is the SA7 Mark II. That's the second generation. It's improved over the first generation. We initially listed 20 sets. A set is a launcher plus 3 missiles, 5 batteries, as I recall. This had a high priority. They're very costly and would have consumed a great deal of the total cost. And the need was so urgent that we discussed the need for trying to get them flown rather than putting them on a ship, as the bulk of this shipment was to be moved.
Now, I noticed the first item on the list is AK-M47s. Are those AK-47 rifles, or?
That's the AK-47. That happens to be the folding stock version, which I had concluded would be preferable for guerrilla operations. They are manufactured in the Soviet bloc for their airborne forces and things like that.
General Singlaub, did you have discussions with the arms dealer at this meeting about the prices for which he could furnish the arms?
Yes, I did.
And was Adolfo Calero present at this meeting?
He was.
Now, what, if anything, did Adolfo Calero say about the prices for the arms?
Well, he thought that they were unusually low, remarked that at least in the case of the AK-47s, that price was about half of what he had previously had to pay.
All right. Sir, after you determined the prices from this meeting with the arms dealer, did you have an occasion to discuss the price with Colonel North?
Yes.
And where did the discussion take place?
Probably in his office, but again, I'm not certain of that. Most of my discussions on this did take place in his office in the old executive office building.
And what, if anything, did Colonel North say concerning the prices for the arms?
As I recall, his initial expression may have been one of disbelief, but confirmed that by and large these prices were lower than anything that he had ever seen before.
General Singlaub, did you have a subsequent meeting in Colonel North's office with Adolfo Calero and General Richard Secord?
Yes, I did.
And when approximately would that be? Would it be in the same period of time?
It's, I believe it was after the list had been approved and after I had submitted the final list to the arms dealer.
And what discussions occurred during this meeting?
My recollection is the need, the primary subject was the need for air defense missiles and how we were going to get them, where we would get them, and how we would get them quickly to the democratic resistance.
Would that be the SA-7 missiles?
The SA-7, that's right. We wished that we'd be able to get some others. We would have liked to have had some U.S. Red Eyes or Stingers. We would like to have gotten some blowpipes from the British, but this appeared to be the best way to go at this time.
General Singlaub, had Oliver North, you testified that you had discussions with your arms dealer, the arms dealer you met with, about the SA-7s, and you received a price on that. Had Oliver North previously asked you to price the SA-7s with your arms dealer?
I certainly indicated that I would get a price. I don't know whether he asked me, but when we discussed the need for the SA-7s, I did, in fact, as a result of that conversation, ask for and get a price for it.
Did General Secord say that he could obtain these weapons, the SA-7s, at a particular price?
Yes. As I recall, his price was higher. Our cost was about $165. I notice this says $164,000 for a set. My recollection is not perfect on this, but I think General Secord said that he could get them for about $180,000, something like that, which we believe to be comparable quality.
Sir, was any decision made by Colonel North and Adolfo Calero concerning the SA-7s?
Yes.
I take it Adolfo Calero was also at this meeting?
He was. Adolfo and I went there and found that when we got there, Dick Secord was there as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Was any decision made by...
Yes, a decision was made by Colonel North and Adolfo that because I was unable to produce trainers to train in the use of these, I came into the meeting without any knowledge of whether or not I had them. General Secord was prepared to provide trainers to not only train in the new missiles, but to find out what was going wrong with the missiles they already had in their possession. And based upon that, Colonel North and Adolfo Calero agreed that they would allow General Secord to procure and ship the SA-7s.
General Singlaub, at this time, would you please turn to what has been pre-marked in your book, Exhibit JKS number 2?
Yes.
And I ask you the same question. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, this I am sure I gave to you.
And how do you, what does this document represent?
This is the final list that was submitted and against which our measure of effectiveness was to be weighed. It also contains the okay of Adolfo Calero down in the lower right-hand corner.
You're referring to the, whose initials are that in the lower right-hand corner?
That's the initial of Adolfo Calero.
And did you give this list to Adolfo Calero to approve? Or did someone else working with you?
I am not certain whether I gave it. I do remember suggesting that we get his initial on the final list so that we would be sure that we had, we're ordering exactly what he wanted.
Now, looking at the list, the SA-7s have been eliminated from the list. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Were they eliminated because of what you had testified earlier, Colonel North's and Adolfo Claro's decision to buy those weapons from General Secord?
Yes. That's what it ended up being. It enabled us to increase the number of rounds of ammunition for the AK-47s and for the RPKs, and to increase the number of AK-47s by eliminating that cost from this list.
General Singlaub, referring back to your meeting again with General Secord in North's office, did General Secord ask you anything about the ship that you were using to deliver these arms to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters?
I don't remember whether it was in that meeting directly from General Secord or whether it was in a subsequent meeting from Colonel North, but we were asked if it would be possible to divert our ship to make a stop in another country to pick up some arms that were hung up there.
Were these arms that General Secord had purchased for
Yes, that was my
Contras?
understanding, that there were some that he had that he needed transportation for.
Do you recall whether General Secord asked you this or whether Colonel North asked you to divert your ship?
I don't remember. I do know that it was related to General Secord's arms procurement activity.
Would it be either General Secord or Colonel North?
I think it would be either one or the other. That's correct, yes.
Now, at some later point in time, General Singlaub, did you learn that General Secord had supplied other arms to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters besides those SA-7s?
Yes, I did.
And what arms did you learn that he had provided?
Well, I understood that he had procured some weapons that were very much delayed. They were coming by surface means from another country. I think that's been referred to as the slow boat from China, rather than to China. And that was to be small arms, similar to the ones on this list, but containing other items that I'm not aware of.
Did you learn anything about the price General Secord had charged the FDN for AK-47s and other weapons?
Well, I think I learned from Adolfo Calero that he had been required by the marketplace or whatever to pay almost twice as much, in some cases more than twice as much, as what we were able to get these weapons for.
Did Colonel North ever say anything about this?
Yes, he did.
What did Colonel North say?
Well, he, as I said earlier, at first he expressed some surprise, doubt that they could be purchased for that price, but made it quite clear that that was a very, very good price and a bargain. We were getting twice as many weapons for the same amount of money.
Colonel North confirmed to you that your prices were cheaper than those of General Secord?
That's correct, yes.
Now, during this same period of time, the spring of 1985, did you have any conversation with Oliver North about the news media?
Yes, I did.
And where did that conversation take place?
To the best of my knowledge, it was in his office. Some of my fundraising activities were being reported heavily by the media. He expressed some concern.
He being Oliver North?
He being Oliver North, that with this high visibility of my fundraising, there might be some connection of Oliver North into this effort, as if because I'd been coming to his office quite regularly. He expressed that concern to me. I said that it was very difficult, if not impossible, for me to raise funds without having visibility, that I had to give speeches and to go to fundraising activities, and these inevitably would be reported on by the media. And he I pointed out that this was essential for what I was doing, but that there were certain benefits associated with that. In addition to the advantage of increasing the fundraising activity, I found that it was a great boost to the morale of the Nicaraguan freedom fighters to have an old soldier who was openly expressing concern for their cause and out trying to help them. That was a benefit.
General Singlaub, let me ask you this question. Did you come to any agreement with Colonel North about your activities and your profile and visibility within news media?
Yes, he indicated that he understood and agreed that I would have to maintain a high profile in order to do this, getting these other benefits, to include one that I discussed with him, and that is that if I had high visibility, I might be the lightning rod and take the attention away from himself and others who were involved in the covert side of support.
And you discussed that with Colonel North?
Yes, we discussed it and reached an agreement that there was little that I could do except to accept this high profile.
And did he agree that that one of the benefits of this would be that, as you testified, to divert attention away from his activities and covert operations?
Yes, since this was one of his concerns, that was brought up as one of the advantages of my high visibility.
And after this meeting with Colonel North, did you continue to give interviews with the press and continue to take a high profile, high visibility role?
Yes, I did.
And at some point in time, did you hire a public relations firm?
Yes, I was having increasing difficulty in meeting the requests from the media. Most of them originated in the Washington, D.C. area. I was getting ready to host a major worldwide conference of the World Anti-Communist League where I would have over 100 nations coming to Dallas, and I needed a public relations firm to handle that. This is in September of 1985, so I did hire a public relations firm to help me.
Now, referring back again, General Singlaub, to the arm shipment that you had arranged and had Colonel North's approval on, when did that ship, the arms, I take it that the arms that you had procured were going to arrive by ship?
That's correct, yes.
When did that ship leave for international waters?
My recollection, it was on the 20th of June, 1985.
And, sir, what make were the arms on board the ship? Were they Eastern?
They were East Bloc manufactured weapons.
And, sir, what financial arrangements with the FDN did you make to pay for these arms?
Adolfo Calero had indicated to me that he had $5.3 million available, which could be used for the purchase of these arms, and we tailored the list to fit within those parameters, recognizing we had to pay for shipment as well as insurance. The agreement was that he would arrange to transfer funds to an account designated by the arms dealer in Switzerland, and when those were received in that bank, then action was taken by the shipper to load the ship and send it to the destination we designated.
Now, sir, at this time, I'd like you to turn to what has been pre-marked JKS Exhibit Number 3.
Those were received I have that, Mr. Ballin.
Thank you. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, again, this, I'm confident, came from my files that I provided to you.
And what is the document, sir?
It's a listing of the weapons and ammunition that was ultimately shipped.
Was this the manifest of the cargo on board the ship, or was it another document reflecting the arms that were shipped?
It's not listed as a manifest, but in fact, that's what it is.
Now, these arms as reflected in Exhibit 3, were these the arms that the FDN had ordered?
Those are exactly the type and quantity of arms requested by the FDN.
And when did those arms arrive for the FDN's use?
They arrived in the designated port on the 8th of July, 1985.
And to whom was the cargo consigned?
To a senior official in the country in which the port was located.
Would this be an official of the military of that country?
A military official, that's correct, yes.
And
The committee, I believe, has the identification of the individual and the port.
what, if anything, had you met this official?
Yes, I had.
And what, if anything, had Adolfo Calero or anyone else told you about him? His role in reference to the FDN?
He had been designated by the government of that country to be the official point of contact in that country with the Nicaraguan Democratic Resistance.
Sir, who in fact met the ship?
A representative of that individual, whose name is Mario Delamico.
You say it was a representative of that individual. Do you know for a fact whether he was a representative of the military official of the country, or did he hold himself out to be such as he met the ship?
He held himself out. He stated that he was the representative. Somebody had to tell him that when the ship was arriving, we had only informed the official that we were supposed to, and he behaved in a way indicating that he had the full authority of that government.
Did you subsequently meet this individual, Mario Delamico?
Yes, I did.
Where was that?
It was in September in Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles giving a lecture or a speech, and he called me at my hotel insisting that he fly on that day from Miami to meet with me.
When was this? When did this occur, General Singlaub?
This is in September of 1985, toward the end, I believe.
Did you meet with him?
Yes, I did.
What did he say to you?
Well, it was a several-hour conversation, as I recall, but the main thrust was that he was in hopes that we would never send another ship as we did in the past, that we would request and purchase the weapon systems from the individual that he worked for. At this point, he claimed to be working for Ron Martin, a recognized arms dealer from Miami.
How did you respond to him?
I interpreted his statements because he continued to make reference to high officials in the host country as a threat. I told him that if his company were able to provide weapons of comparable quality at the same cost, we would of course buy from him and thereby eliminate the need for arranging transportation. But my interest was in getting the best quality weapons, the largest number of them for the FDN, and that was my primary guiding principle, and that's the way I would operate in the future.
General Singlaub, did you subsequently report this conversation with Mario Delamico to Colonel Oliver North?
Yes, I did.
And when was that?
I can't give you the exact date, but I suspect it was in October of '85 or thereabouts.
Would that also have occurred in Colonel North's office?
Yes, it certainly was not over the telephone.
And what did you say to Colonel North at that time?
Well, I objected to his behavior. I told him that I thought that it was kind of a threat and that I was in hopes that there was not going to be any pressure placed on us to buy from this company, which would give us only half the weapons for the same amount of money. He said that he would take whatever action was necessary on this.
Did he agree with you as to whether or not to purchase from this source? He said he would take whatever action is necessary.
Yeah, my recollection is that he was non-committal. I just don't remember what transpired from that.
Was he pleased with this approach by Delamico, or was
No, he was not pleased. He agreed with me that that was inappropriate, and that he agreed with me that it appeared to be in the nature of a threat.
I take it he agreed to do, you testified earlier, he agreed to take whatever action he felt was necessary.
That's right.
In that regard. Sir, let me at this time ask you to turn to what has been pre-marked Exhibit JKS 5.
Yes, I have that.
Do you recognize the document?
Yes, I have seen that previously.
And what is this document? What does it reflect?
It reflects the transmittal of a letter that I wrote to Bill Casey.
Well, let me direct you to JKS 4. I believe I have the wrong exhibit, the previous exhibit, and ask you. I was one step ahead of myself.
Right. Okay. I have JKS Exhibit 4. The same question.
Same question.
This is a memorandum reporting a telephone call that had been received here in Washington from the arms dealer, who reports that Mario Delamico went to the embassy of the East Bloc country from which these weapons had been purchased, demanding that they sell him weapons at the same price. And of course, the authorities denied that they had sold us any weapons. They didn't really believe it or know of it. When this was reported to me, I requested that the information be provided to Colonel North, and this is the memo to Colonel North reporting this incredible thing, because the arms dealer was summoned to the embassy of that country in Switzerland shortly after Delamico appeared at that embassy here, and was given a rocket for having engaged in such activities. His assistant, that is the arms dealer's assistant, was similarly called at exactly the same time to that East Bloc country's embassy in Austria and given a similar blast.
General Singlaub, did you discuss this, or do you know whether or not this memo was in fact turned over to Colonel North?
I'm confident that it eventually got to his attention, yes.
Did you have any conversation with him about it?
Yes, I did. This reinforced statements that I had said earlier about the irresponsible behavior of Mario Delamico. I had had other complaints about him with respect to meeting some of the aircraft that were flying relief supplies from New Orleans down to Tegucigalpa or to the airfield. He would meet those planes and take charge.
General Singlaub, did there come a time when you spoke to the Director of Central Intelligence, William Casey, about how effectively a company in which you were associated, GeoMilitech, had handled the July arms shipment?
Yes, I spoke to him on at least 2 occasions. I must say that those were not in his office, as I recall, because it probably was at a social activity, because he and I had agreed that I would not mention the subject of support to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters to him. He threatened to throw me out of his office if I did. I would try to say, now, look, you're the Chief of Intelligence. Aren't you interested in knowing what is happening down there? No, he would shout, and make it clear that we would not discuss it. So all of my visits with him were on areas of my activity in other parts of the world and not related to Nicaragua.
You had known him for some time. Is that not true?
Yes, I had. When I parachuted into occupied France, he was my case officer. He was the officer in London who responded to my urgent needs and gave me direction.
Sir, what was your purpose? What did you say to him about this company? What was your purpose in praising the company?
I pointed out to him in a very brief conversation that we had been able to set together a mechanism which appeared to be secure, honest, efficient for delivering weapons to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters at considerably less cost than what had been charged by the agency when they were running it, or by anyone subsequent to that. And I thought that he ought to know of that and make some effort to use that facility in the future.
Do you know whether or not your conversations with Director of Central Intelligence Casey led to a meeting with Casey and the President of GeoMilitech?
Yes, it did.
When did that occur?
I believe in December of 1985.
Were you present at that meeting?
No, I was not.
Did you receive a report of that meeting after it occurred?
Yes, I did.
Sir, at this time I would like you to turn to what has been pre-marked as Exhibit JKS-7.
Yes, I have that.
Again, I'd like to ask you if you recognize this particular document. I'm sorry, JKS-6. My book is differently marked.
Yes, I have seen that document previously.
And when did you see it?
I am not able to specify the exact time, but I saw it before it was presented to Director Casey.
Was it presented to Director Casey during that December meeting that you...
I don't have first-hand knowledge of that, but I understand that it was, yes.
Now, do you know whether or not this document was presented to any other individuals apart from Director Casey?
I believe that it was discussed with Oliver North. I know that it was discussed with former senior officials of the U.S. government.
And what does the document reflect, sir?
It's a proposal to provide country A with some equipment that they need to enhance their situation. The country B needs some things that they can get from the U.S., and it was a three-way trade which would enable the U.S. government, the administration, to acquire some Soviet bloc weapons without having to go through the painful process of appropriations.
And this was to provide weapons to insurgencies, anti-communist insurgencies around the world?
That's correct.
including that in Nicaragua?
including that in Nicaragua, but not limited to that.
Sir, do you know whether or not Director Casey ever approved of this plan?
I do not know.
And did you have a personal opinion of the plan at the time?
Yes, I was not enthusiastic about it for one aspect, and that is that one of the countries involved was one that I did not feel we ought to be enhancing their military capability.
Other than that, how did you feel about the
I thought it
proposal?
was a good plan which would make it possible for the U.S. to be a little more covert in their support for resistance forces, democratic resistance forces around the world.
General Singlaub, directing your, did you ever travel, you testified earlier about your travels and your solicitation to country number 3 in January of 1985, and your reports and approval of Colonel North at that time. Did you ever travel again to country number 3 soliciting funds for the Nicaraguan freedom fighters?
I traveled to country number 3 and to country number 5 in May of 1986, and it was my intention to follow up because I had no indication that my first efforts had been successful.
You had no firsthand knowledge of whether or not Country 3 had contributed $2 million to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters after your trip?
That is correct. I did not have until this hearing started.
Now, like your previous trip, did you have, before going over to solicit funds again for the Nicaraguan freedom fighters from country number 3, did you have any conversations with Oliver North?
No, I didn't have any conversations directly with Oliver North. By that time, the principal contact for activities in Central America and specifically the Nicaraguan democratic resistance was Elliot Abrams.
Did you have any conversations with Elliot Abrams?
Yes, I did. I briefed him on my first trip and explained that one of the things that I did not have clearly established before I left on that trip was how the U.S. would send a signal, and I wanted to have worked that out in advance this time, and he concurred in the solicitation of both Country 3 and Country 5 and said that he would be the one that would give the signal. And then I proceeded on the trip, made arrangements to see the head of state in both of those countries.
Did, in fact, you travel to country number 3 again?
I did.
And what happened when you arrived in country number 3?
After my appointment in country number 3 was firm, I received a telephone call from Elliot Abrams, and he told me to not carry through with the extracurricular activity that I had explained to him I was going to be involved in. I was going there for another purpose. And I said, well, my gosh, I've already made appointments, so can you tell me why? He said, I can't tell you why now, but when you get back, I'll explain why you are not to make that solicitation.
So then did you desist from making the solicitation?
I did, and it was clear that I should not make the second attempt at country number 5.
When you returned to the United States, did you have occasion to talk to Elliot Abrams about why he had asked you to desist?
Yes, I did.
And what at that time did Elliot Abrams say to you?
He indicated that the reason that I was not to make the solicitation is that it was going to be handled by someone at the highest level, which I assumed to mean someone in the White House.
And did he mention anyone in the White House by name or not?
No, he did not.
Now, General Singlaub, I would like to direct your attention to exhibit what is marked JKS Exhibit 5?
Yes, I have that.
Sir, again, I'll ask you if you recognize that particular document.
Yes, I've seen it before.
And what does the document reflect?
Well, it's a transmittal to someone unidentified of a personal letter that I sent to Bill Casey.
And did this letter result, General Singlaub, from any conversation that you had with Oliver North in July of 1986?
Yes, I believe that this was a result of a request from Oliver North that I provide to Mr. Casey a list of the weapons that could be purchased at the prices that we were offering. And that's in essence what this is.
Were these items of military hardware to be furnished to the Nicaraguan freedom fighters?
Yes.
And what did you say in your letter to Director Casey about this list?
I indicated that it was probably going to take some time before the funds were actually flowing and before they could be obligated, but that the contacts that we had previously established, which had proven to be reliable, were prepared to advance money to enable the arms to be purchased and shipped against a future payment after the details of the appropriation were available.
In other words, this was a plan to extend credit before funds were appropriated by Congress in order to purchase weapons for the Nicaraguan freedom fighters.
That's correct.
And, sir, did you discuss this idea in this list with Colonel North, as well as Director Casey?
I believe that I did, yes. I don't remember the occasion, but this is the type of thing that I ordinarily would have reported to him so that we wouldn't have any crossed wires.
And, sir, do you know whether or not this proposal was ever accepted either by the CIA or by Colonel North?
I know that it was not.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I just have one brief subject matter left to my direct. About 5 minutes.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Singlaub, you mentioned in your opening statement your involvement with Aidan Pastora, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions about that. In March of 1986, before you left to meet with Pastora, did you discuss your plan with Elliott Abrams?
Yes, I did.
What did you say to Elliott Abrams?
I reviewed with Elliott Abrams the information that I had from Nicaragua, which in essence was that the only person in the democratic resistance there that had name recognition throughout all of Nicaragua was Comandante Zero, Aidan Pastora, and that I realized that there had been conflicts in controlling him in the past. I thought perhaps some of these problems were related to personality conflicts or to amateurism on the part of the case officer. In any case, he appeared to be an asset that ought not be lost and wasted. And I told him that I would like to go down and try to convince him to rejoin the United Nicaraguan Opposition. And while he expressed some doubts that that could be done,
He being Elliott Abrams?
He meaning Elliott Abrams, opposed no objections to that.
And did you discuss your plan before you left with anyone else, in addition to Elliott Abrams?
Yes, I had discussed it with some staff members of a senator. I discussed it with some other members of the Department of State. I was anxious to talk to Elliot because he was meeting repeatedly with Oliver North. I knew that Oliver North was not enthusiastic about trying to get Eden Pastora back into the resistance. He did not trust
Well,
him.
let me ask you this question, sir. Did you meet with Ben Wickham?
Ben Wickham was not a member of the administration at that time. He had retired. Ben Wickham had been recommended to me by Bill Casey as a good source of information because Ben Wickham had been the station chief in Managua for 3 years during the Sandinista period.
And had Ben Wickham also been Director Casey's special deputy before his
He had been
retirement?
special assistant, I believe was the title, to Bill Casey. That's correct.
And he was he recently retired at the time that you met him?
That's correct.
Sir, did you subsequently travel to Central America and meet with Eden Pastora?
I did, yes.
And did you come to an agreement with Eden Pastora?
Yes. Ultimately, I came to an agreement with him which was favorable to all persons concerned, but this was after a considerable amount of investigation in that area.
In substance, sir, was your agreement that Eden Pastora would go into Nicaragua and return supplies, food, other medicines, as well as ammunition would be furnished to him by other Contra forces?
That's correct, yes.
Now, did you show this agreement to any officials of the United States government?
On the day that it was signed by Eden Pastora and myself, I took it to and gave it to the U.S. ambassador to Costa Rica,
And who was that at the time?
Louis Tams.
What was his reaction to the agreement that you had struck with Pastora?
He was very pleased. He was very pleased, and he exhibited some surprise that we were able to get that agreement, because the agreement was that Eden Pastora would do all of the things that would eliminate the problems that the government officials of both Costa Rica and the United States had expressed concerning his presence there, and I had previously gotten an agreement that we would be able to provide some of the equipment that Eden Pastora needed.
Now, General Singlaub, did you speak to Adolfo Calero about furnishing ammunition and other supplies to Eden Pastora?
Yes, I did.
How did he respond?
Well, like Oliver North, he was not enthusiastic, but he did agree that the small quantity of ammunition that was needed to execute this plan was available in another country in Central America, could be transferred to a point of rendezvous that I had set up with Eden Pastora.
Just so the members of the committee understand, Eden Pastora was to operate in the south of Nicaragua, in the southern front?
That's right, yes.
Now, did Pastora ever receive this ammunition?
No, he did not. Ammunition was just a small part of it. He needed boots, he needed clothing, he needed medicines. I had personally visited his camps inside Nicaragua and found his people to be in terrible shape.
Did he receive any of these supplies?
He received none of it. That's correct. I was assured that the non-lethal equipment could be provided, and I was prepared to buy that and send it. But there were constant delays and postponements, even though I had absolute assurances that this was going to go through. And it was after I left the country on another activity that I was informed that we had reneged, we meaning collectively the people of the United States, and he had gone inside with his troops, taken up position, had sent his aircraft to the rendezvous location to pick up the supplies. They never arrived. Ultimately, he had to surrender. He walked out, turned himself in to the Costa Rican authorities, and was thrown in jail.
Well, when you say we had reneged, who was we?
Well, I was responsible for the agreement. I thought I had the support lined up with the necessary U.S. officials and the officials of the FDN, but
Did someone in the U.S. government renege on that, or
I learned later that it was someone in CIA who gave instructions that that aircraft would not deliver the supplies as we had agreed.
so that Aiden Pastora did not get those badly needed supplies?
He and his troops did not, and they were forced to cross the border and turn themselves in. And as I said, Aiden Pastora was thrown in prison in Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, General Singlaub. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Mr. Kerr, do you have any questions? General Singlaub, will you favor us by returning tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. We will now resume the questioning of Mr. Calero, and committee will take a short recess.